students, Miss D here. This lesson is focusing on run-ons, run-on sentences, recognizing them, and the different methods for correcting them. To start off, run-ons are basically two or more sentences that have been joined together incorrectly. They are basically on the opposite spectrum of fragments. Fragments are incomplete sentences that don't express complete thoughts or are possibly missing a subject, missing a verb, whereas run-on sentences are essentially too much sentence. And basically what needs to happen is there needs to be some form of punctuation to fix those kinds of errors. With run-on sentences, there are two primary types that you can run into with your writing. One is a fused sentence. The other, which is probably the most common, is the comma splice. Fused sentences are sentences that have been joined together with no punctuation. There is nothing to separate the two complete thoughts. So, for example, this sentence here, in which the faucet is dripping and the stove is broken, that is two complete thoughts. The faucet is dripping, that's one sentence. The stove is broken, that's another complete sentence, but there is no punctuation anywhere in that sentence to separate those two complete thoughts. So that's a fused sentence. Mary is a good writer. She writes nice poetry. Once again, two complete thoughts joined together, but there is no punctuation to separate those two sentences. So a fused sentence is two sentences joined together, but there is no punctuation to separate those complete thoughts. The more common form of a run-on is known as a comma splice. A comma splice is simply when you are using a comma to separate two complete thoughts. So basically the difference, fused sentence, no punctuation, comma splice, uses a comma, both of which are indeed incorrect. If we take a look at this first example, the neighbor's cat meows all night. She chases my dog. Okay, two complete thoughts here. The neighbor's cat meows all night. That's one complete thought. She chases my dog. That's also a complete thought, but they're joined by a comma and a comma only. That is incorrect. You must combine that comma with some other form of either a coordinating conjunction or possibly use it with a transitional expression and a semicolon. But you cannot use a comma by itself. This other example, Joe works at the auto shop in town. He has worked there for 20 years. Once again, two complete thoughts. Joe works at the auto shop in town. That's one. He has worked there for 20 years. There's your second. But once again, we have only used a comma to separate those two complete thoughts. And once again, that is a comma splice. So run-on sentences can happen just about at any point in your writing, just as can fragments. But they are just as much of a problem that needs to be revised as fragments are. So in fixing any given run-on, there are 5 different methods you can use in which to fix them. One of which is to use a period to separate the two sentences. 2, use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. 3, use a semicolon. 4, a transitional expression. Or 5, using a subordinating conjunction. So what we have here are 3 sample run-on sentences that I'm going to use for examples throughout each of the different methods. So I have Lila goes to night school. She is studying to be a nurse. The movie was 3 hours long. It was really boring. I love to watch television. I prefer to go to the theater and watch plays. Notice how each of these run-ons is a fused sentence. I purposefully created 3 fused sentences without any form of punctuation for the purposes of demonstrating each of the different methods for creating corrected sentences. So the first method is use a period to separate into complete sentences. Okay, so my first one, Lila goes to night school. She is studying to be a nurse. Okay, well that's simple enough. I can simply put a period after school, capitalize my S in she, and I have my period at the end, and I have 2 complete sentences. Lila goes to night school. She is studying to be a nurse. Same thing with the next one. The movie was 3 hours long. That's one complete thought. And then my second idea, it was really boring. I can simply capitalize my I in it, and I have 2 complete sentences. I love to watch television. That's a complete thought. I prefer to go to the theater and watch plays. Also a complete thought. So now I have fixed each of those run-ons to take the form of separate sentences. Now, there is one downside to using this particular method, and that is normally when you have a run-on sentence, your original intent was for those 2 ideas to go together. There was a reason that you wrote this idea with this idea, and you connected the 2 in one sentence. So in most cases, using a period to separate sentences, it is a good way to separate those thoughts into separate sentences, but it does take away that whole joint connection between those 2 thoughts, which is probably what you had originally intended within those particular sentences. However, it is a good thing to keep in mind, especially if you have the possibility of a rambling sentence. Run-ons are not just 2 sentences joined together. It could also be 3, 4, 5, depending upon how long your run-on is. So it is possible that if you do have a run-on sentence, you may want to separate them into sentences because it is entirely too lengthy for your reader to be able to understand your message. A good rule of thumb that I use is when in doubt, break it up. If you have any doubts the sentence is too long, my recommendation is just go ahead and break it up, because if you're having doubts, there's a good possibility that it probably is too long, and you should just go ahead and break them in 2 and create the separate thoughts. Okay, so that's the first method, using a period to separate the complete sentences into 2 separate thoughts. That is one method you can use in which to correct any given run-on. However, in most cases, it probably will not be the method that you will lean towards. So that brings us to the second method of correcting run-ons, which is probably the absolute most common, the comma and coordinating conjunction. This is probably the most common way to fix any given run-on because they help to show the connection between the 2 thoughts, and we have all used coordinating conjunctions within our writing at some point in our essays, paragraphs, compositions, what have you. Coordinating conjunctions can also be referred to as your fanboys. Fanboys. This is a very helpful mnemonic device that you can use to remember those 7 coordinating conjunctions. If you know your fanboys, you know your coordinators. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Each coordinating conjunction has their own function within a compound sentence when they are used to join 2 ideas together. For example, probably one of the least used coordinating conjunctions is the word for. Usually because most people prefer to just say because. Why is that? For means pretty much the exact same as because. I went back to school for I want to get a promotion at work. I could easily substitute because in place of for. I went back to school because I want to get a promotion at work. So for has that same function. So it almost serves as another way of saying because without saying because. And it kind of gives you another way of expressing yourself within that kind of sentence. We're all familiar with and, which is simply joins like ideas together. A word about and is you don't want to use it too much. Some writers rely on and way too much. Sometimes when you overuse and, it almost makes it look like you don't know what you're talking about, or you're grasping at straws trying to put this sentence together, and you just have no clue what it is that you're trying to express in your writing. So and is a good conjunction to use to join key ideas together, but don't overdo it. Try to use other words, other conjunctions or forms to join ideas together, and don't always rely on and. Nor is also a coordinating conjunction that's not very widely used, but it is used to show negative ideas. The one thing about nor is you often have to invert the second idea. She will not do her homework, nor will she do her project. Okay, notice how she will not do her homework. Okay, that's a normal sentence, but will she do her project? That's not a normal thought, but when combined with the coordinating conjunction nor, that creates a full complete thought. She will not do her homework, nor will she do her project. So even though it may sound a little funny, that is the proper way to use nor to combine two ideas together. The key there is that your first sentence has to be in the negative, not nothing, nowhere, no one, nobody. There has to be some form of a negative in that first sentence. She will not, I cannot, I do not, Joe should not. There has to be some form of negative in that first sentence in order to use nor to combine two thoughts together. Okay? But also a very common fanboy coordinating conjunction used in sentences, simply used to show a contrast or the opposite. And but are probably the most used coordinating conjunctions of the fanboy list because they tend to be the most universal. Or is simply used to show alternatives, other ideas. I will do my homework, or I will play Grand Theft Auto. Okay, good choices right there, right? Yet. Yet is very similar to but. It also is used to show a contrast or an opposite idea, but the key with yet is it's meant to show shock or surprise. Basically with yet, it means the same thing as but you are emphasizing sort of a surprising or shocking idea. For example, she has a beautiful face, yet she is getting plastic surgery on Saturday. Okay? Now, it may not sound super shocking, super surprising, that sentence that I just spoke, but the second idea, she is having plastic surgery on Saturday, you wouldn't expect that from the first idea, well, she has a beautiful face. So, yet is used to show not only the contrast, but also that kind of shocking, surprising idea being presented in the second sentence. The last of the fanboys, coordinating conjunctions, is the word so. Sorry, that's too small if you can't see it. But so is primarily used for cause and effect relationships. This is where you want to say, because this happened, this happened. My mom started going to school so she could get her master's degree. You know, because she did this, this is what's going to happen. It started to rain, so I got wet. Cause and effect. So we're using so to demonstrate those relationships of cause and effect. So coordinating conjunctions, same thing as fanboys. As long as you remember your fanboys, for and nor, but or yet so, you have your coordinating conjunctions. So going back to our sample sentences, once again, Lila goes to night school. She is studying to become a nurse, to be a nurse. I could easily put in a coordinating conjunction to fix this particular run-on. So I could easily insert, let's get the right color here. So I could easily insert something like, I could say, Lila goes to night school for she is studying to be a nurse. Remember the fanboy for, not very widely used, but can be used in place of saying because. I could easily in that first sentence say, Lila goes to night school because she is studying to be a nurse. But instead of saying because, which tends to be a pretty often used term, I chose to use for. Now the one key thing about using coordinating conjunctions in your sentences is don't forget the comma. That is the key to fixing that run-on. If you have all of the words but not the comma, it is still a run-on. All you've done is simply added one more word. So don't forget the comma. The movie was 3 hours long. It was really boring. These two ideas seem to go together really well, so I could simply pop in my comma and insert and. The movie was 3 hours long and it was really boring. Just using and to connect those two ideas together. I love to watch television. I prefer to go to the theater and watch plays. Now here I'm showing kind of a contrast idea. I like television, however, I also like going to the theater and watching plays. So two different ideas being presented, opposites. This would be a good one to use, but, in which I'm simply showing a contrast of opposing ideas. And notice, don't forget the comma. The key with those coordinating conjunctions is the comma. Okay? The third method of using methods for correcting run-on sentences is the use of the semicolon. Now, the semicolon is probably the least used piece of punctuation in our language, mainly because, from my experience, most writers don't know how to use semicolons. They tend to be that one piece of punctuation that really isn't widely discussed in schools. I know when I was in school, semicolons were never mentioned. It was commas, periods, exclamation point, quotation marks, apostrophes. That was primarily it. There was no discussion about semicolons. I would just use them because I thought they were pretty. And I found out the hard way that it is possible to misuse a semicolon. That was pointed out to me in my first year of college. Semicolons can be used to separate complete thoughts. So when you're writing compound sentences such as these, and you don't want to use and, but, or, yet. So you don't want to use a fanboy. You don't want to use anything else in between. You don't want to separate them into two separate sentences. You really want those two ideas to go together. Just simply do this. You simply pop a semicolon in between. Lila goes to night school. She is studying to be a nurse. The movie was 3 hours long. It was really boring. I love to watch television. I prefer to go to the theater and watch plays. You see? Using a semicolon can simply take the place of saying and, but, or, yet, so, and you're not having to worry about any additional commas or any other form of punctuation. A warning about semicolons is don't overuse them. Semicolons should be used sparingly within your writing. It can make it sometimes hard for your reader to follow your message if your writing is riddled with semicolons, because essentially you're going from one idea straight into the next with no break. So I like to use semicolons in particular when I am presenting a message that I have one idea and then the second idea I want my reader to get to it fast with no break. I don't want them to take a breath with a but or an and or anything like that. I want them to go straight from this idea to this idea. So often I will use a semicolon to accomplish that task. And that is also something that you can consider whenever you are debating about the possibility of inserting a semicolon within a compound sentence. Okay. The next method for correcting run-on sentences is the use of a transitional expression. Transitional expressions can sometimes be problematic for writers because there is this particular way in which they have to be punctuated. Oftentimes, this punctuation is something that a lot of writers have not seen before. I will admit, it wasn't until recently, within the last few years, that I had even seen this form of punctuation being used with transitional expressions. It's not something I had really even heard of. So this may be something that you have also not seen yourself. Transitional expressions, this is in no way an exhaustive list of transitional expressions, but these do tend to be the most common transitional expressions, words like however, therefore, furthermore, on the other hand, instead, meanwhile, All of these words can be used in between complete thoughts to join ideas together. The thing about transitional expressions is this right here. When you are using transitional expressions to combine ideas together, you have to punctuate them in a very specific way. It's always going to be semicolon, your expression, comma. Now that may have been something that you've never seen before. So if I go back to my sample sentences, Lila goes to night school, she is studying to be a nurse. I could use something like also. So I want to put also in between these two thoughts to join the ideas together. Lila goes to night school, also she is studying to be a nurse. Now if I want to use this transitional expression to combine these two ideas together, semicolon, comma. And that's how you punctuate it. The movie was 3 hours long. It was really boring. Okay? I could do something like, the movie was 3 hours long. Moreover, it was really boring. And then once again, I have to use semicolon, comma, when using a transitional expression to punctuate that particular sentence. I love to watch television. I prefer to go to the theater and watch plays. Once again, remember that I am working with a contrast in this particular sentence. So I could do something like, however. I love to watch television, however, I prefer to go to the theater. Don't forget your semicolon, and don't forget your comma. With transitional expressions being used to combine sentences together, it's always semicolon first, comma after. The last method for correcting run-ons is the use of a subordinating conjunction, in which you use a technique known as subordination. Subordination is when you are essentially making one of those sentences into a dependent clause. Whoops, I can spell. So the use of subordinating conjunctions can also be used to correct almost any given run-on. I say almost because sometimes it can be a little tricky to find a good subordinating conjunction to fit in between the two sentences that you're working with. And I think I may have an example of that up here, one or two of them. That actually, when I was preparing for this, had some trouble trying to think of a good subordinating conjunction to place in between them. So maybe you can think of a good one that I could use instead. But anyway, subordinating conjunctions, you may recognize these as being part of that rather extensive list of what are known as dependent words, particularly in fragments. Most commonly, dependent word fragments begin with subordinating conjunctions. Once again, this is by no means a totally exhaustive list of subordinating conjunctions, but this tends to be the most common, primarily used subordinating conjunctions in our language. So although, even though, because, since, if, when, where, all of these are known as subordinating conjunctions. When subordinating conjunctions are used to correct run-on sentences, you can simply place them in between the two complete thoughts. So going back to our first one, Lila goes to night school. She is studying to be a nurse. Well, if you recall, I was able to use the coordinating conjunction for this particular sentence, so I could also use because. And just simply place that within my sentence. Now, remember, there's a very key rule in regards to comma usage with subordinating conjunctions. If I am placing my subordinating conjunction in between two complete thoughts, there will be no comma used within that sentence. But if I were to change this sentence by reversing it, so instead of starting it with Lila goes to night school because she is studying to be a nurse, I could say because, well, let's start off with Lila. Because Lila is studying to be a nurse, she goes to night school. Okay, I could definitely do that, but there's one little problem. If I choose to rework my sentence so that my subordinating conjunction is now at the opening of my sentence, as here, I have to remember, because Lila's studying to be a nurse, comma, she goes to night school. So when you're placing your subordinating conjunction in between two complete thoughts, no comma. But if you choose to connect these two thoughts together by placing your dependent clause at the opening of your sentence, then you have to have a comma. With the next one, the movie was 3 hours long. It was really boring. I really could not think of a good subordinating conjunction to put within that particular framework. As well as I love to watch television although, with this one I could put in something like although I prefer to go to theater and watch plays. That does work, because it helps to show the contrast between those two ideas. But with this one, you know, and you may run into this with your own writing at times, the sentence just does not lend itself to a certain method of correction. That just goes to show that our language is so complex that one particular method of correction will not work for any given sentence. That's why there are so many methods available to you, so that you can put your sentences together in a way that conveys your message and does so using grammatically correct sentence structure and punctuation. Okay. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in class.